Okay,
Welcome to the
unpack
deep
this.
dive. We're looking at some
Remember
material
being
today
asked,
that asks,
what do you want to be when you
a
grow
really
up?
big question.
Oh,
I
yeah,
think.
that question.
And for most
Why do
of
some
us, the
people
answer
just
was
seem to
always
get money,
about
you
a
know,
job.
They find financial
Doctor,
success.
engineer,
While others,
maybe a teacher.
people who are
Right.
smart,
Finding
work
that
really
secure
hard.
spot, earning a paycheck.
They just
That
keep struggling.
traditional way of
It's
thinking,
a real
it
puzzle,
usually
isn't
puts
it?
us
You
in
see people,
well,
maybe
one or two
same
specific
industry,
places on a
same
kind of
effort level,
financial
but
map.
just
And that's exactly
wildly
what the
different
source material
financial
we're diving
results.
into today
And
talks about.
these
This
sources
idea
we're
of
diving
the
into,
cash
they suggest
flow
the answer
quadrant.
isn't necessarily the external
It's
stuff.
like a diagram, a map.
knowing the
really.
hottest stock or
Helps you
having the
understand
perfect
not
business
just what you
plan.
do
It
for
might
money,
be
but
something much more
well,
internal.
where your money's
Internal.
actually
Okay, that's
coming
interesting.
from.
So
And the different
not just the
paths
economy or
people
getting
take.
lucky. It's
Because they
deeper,
are
something
really different.
subconscious, maybe.
Fundamentally
Exactly.
different.
The term
So we've
these
looked at
sources
some,
use is your
really
financial
foundational
blueprint.
writings on this.
Okay.
And our
And
mission here
yeah,
in this
our
deep
goal
dive
here,
is
our mission
basically to
for this
navigate
deep
that
dive is
map.
to really
Understand the
unpack
four
that.
quadrants, yeah.
What
the
is it?
differences
Where does it
between them,
actually come from?
and
How does it
maybe most
quietly,
importantly,
influence
explore
your results?
The sort of personal,
And
internal
most importantly,
journey that's
can you change
required.
it?
Especially
Are
if
there
you're thinking about
practical
moving
things you
towards the
can
right
do?
side of that
That's
map.
the key
The
question.
B&I
And the
side.
sources say yes.
Big business
They
and
offer some
investor.
concrete
Exactly.
ways to
So it's really an
potentially reshape it.
invitation for
All right,
you
let's get into it.
listening
So
to think about
the
your own
main
place.
idea
Where
starting
are
off
you on
is
this
that
landscape? If this
It's like getting a new
subconscious
pair of
blueprint
glasses,
thing
you
isn't
know,
really
to
set
view your
for
financial
success,
life. It looks simple,
then
but
all
the
the knowledge,
implications,
all the effort,
they're huge.
it might not make
Absolutely.
a huge
So
difference.
That's the
let's
core
get into the
argument.
map itself.
The
What are
author
the 4
shares a
points,
personal
the 4
story,
quadrants?
someone
Okay,
who
first you've got
seemed
E,
to have it all
that's
on
for
paper,
employee.
potential,
Having a
read
job.
the books,
Yep.
went to the
Working for
seminars,
someone else,
tried
getting a
different
salary, a
businesses,
But
wage.
struggled.
Your
consistently
income comes
struggled.
from
Yeah.
your work.
They talk about
trading
having
your
Loch
time.
Ness
Okay,
monster
E.
disease
Then there's
when it
F.
came to profit.
S is
Heard of it, never
self-employed
saw it.
or
Exactly.
small business owner.
And the big
These are the people
light
who
bulb moment came when they looked
basically own
around
their
and saw
job.
other
Their own
people
boss,
succeeding
doing their
in
own
the
thing.
same businesses
Exactly.
where
They want
were
that
failing.
independence.
Ouch.
And look, if they
That
work
must have
hard,
stung.
they get paid
It forced a
well. But if
realization.
they stop working,
The problem wasn't
income
the
often
business
stops,
model. It
too.
wasn't the
Right,
market.
because
it
they
was
are the
internal.
system.
It was
Okay,
them.
E and S
They
on one
found
side.
these
What about
deep,
the other
deep
side?
The right
worries and
side.
fears
That's where you
about
find
money
B
they didn't
for
even
big business
consciously
owner.
realize
And this
were
is different
driving
from S.
things.
How?
Wow.
It's really
Okay,
different.
so the sources
A
are
B
definitely
owner
drawing
owns
the
a
line
system,
then.
not just a
Between
job.
like
The business
outer
makes
game of
money,
money,
whether they're physically
the
there day to
strategies,
day or not.
management,
Ah, okay,
investing
they have
know-how,
people
running the
Yes.
system for them,
They
and something
lead
else.
people
An
and
inner
they
game.
own the
Precisely.
system. That's the key.
They
Got it.
really
And the
stress the
last
importance
one,
of this
I.
inner game.
I
And
is
that
for
includes things like
investor.
your character,
This is where your money
fundamental
starts
ways
working
of
for you.
thinking, your
So,
core beliefs, your
income
habits,
from investments.
even your
Yeah.
confidence level,
Assets.
and
Precisely.
maybe surprisingly,
Your
your,
money is
sense
making
of
more
deserving
money.
wealth.
Deserving
That's
this.
the goal.
Yeah,
of
the
I
analogy they
quadrant.
use is
So the
pretty
source
vivid.
material really draws a
carpenter
big
with
line
tools.
between the left
Okay.
side
You give
and
a
the right
carpenter
side.
the
Oh,
absolute
absolutely.
best,
That's
most
maybe the
expensive
most
tools,
critical
top of
distinction.
the line
E&S
everything.
on
But
the
if the
left,
carpenter
D&I on the
themselves
right.
isn't
Left side, you're
skilled, if
working
they don't
for
have
money,
that inner
trading time.
mastery,
Right.
The
And on
tools
the
don't
right
matter much.
side,
You won't
you
get a
have
masterpiece.
money or systems working
exactly,
for you.
the
Okay.
tools are
And people
useless
can be
without a
more than one,
top-notch
right.
carpenter.
And they
That
can
really
move.
paints
Definitely.
a picture. It
You can
connects
be
to
in
that
multiple
quote in the
quadrants,
sources.
and you can absolutely choose
It's
to
not
move.
enough to be
But
in the right place at the right
that
time.
move,
You have to be the
especially
right
from left
person
to
in the
right.
right
Sounds
place
like
at
it's
the right
more than
time.
just changing jobs.
Right.
Oh, it's way
The right
more. It's
person.
a fundamental.
So it boils
internal
down to
shift.
who
the
you
sources
are
spend
inside.
a lot of time on this.
Your thinking,
the differences
your
in
beliefs.
mindset, in values.
That's what sets
Okay,
your
let's talk
ceiling
about
for
values.
success.
That's the argument.
On the left
and
side,
they suggest this is a
E
big reason
especially.
why most
It's all
people
about
don't
security,
achieve,
isn't it?
massive
Security is
financial
huge.
freedom. They
Job
haven't developed the
security,
internal
benefits,
capacity.
The capacity
maybe a
to handle it.
pension.
Like,
That's the core
handle the money
value for
itself,
many E's.
And maybe
And
the responsibilities that come
they
with
value
Exactly, the challenges, the
independence,
decisions.
but maybe
It's a
security
different
comes from their
level.
own
We've all
hard
heard
work.
those stories,
yeah,
haven't we?
their own
Lottery
skill,
winners,
their own hustle.
they get this
But
huge
on the right
windfall.
side,
Millions
B&I,
overnight.
the
But
value
then,
shift.
statistically,
It's more about
so
freedom.
many
financial
end
freedom,
up right back
exactly.
where they started,
Building
or sometimes
assets,
worse
building
off.
systems
It's a
for the
classic
long
example.
haul.
And
The
this is where
sources
the
use a
source
thermostat
material
analogy.
kind of
Their
takes
financial
aim at
thermostat
traditional
was set
schooling.
low.
Yeah, it
maybe
argues
for
that
just
school
getting
mostly
by.
prepares
So the
us
money
for
comes
the
in.
E
But the
quadrant,
internal
maybe the
setting,
S.
the blueprint,
Not necessarily
hasn't
for
changed.
finding your life's path.
So
or
subconsciously,
thriving as a
they
B or
drift
an
back
I.
to that
Right.
familiar,
That whole financial
comfortable
education
financial
piece,
level.
understanding
Okay.
assets,
Now, contrast that
liabilities,
with, say,
cash flow, it's
self-made
just
millionaires who lose
lose
missing from
everything.
most
They often bounce back,
traditional
right?
education.
Sometimes
Which
really
is pretty
fast.
striking when
Yeah.
you think about it.
Donald
is.
Trump is mentioned as
And
an
the author
example.
uses his
the
own
idea
story,
is his financial
failing
thermostat is
English,
just set
dropping
way
out of an MBA
higher,
program.
for
School wasn't
billions.
his path.
So
But he
even
ended
if
up
he lost
successful
it
as a
all and just had
teacher,
$1 million
writer,
left, the
entrepreneur,
sources say
investor.
he'd feel
Yeah,
broke.
it shows that
because
academic
internal
success
standard is
isn't
just
the only
different.
predictor,
While most
especially
people-
for the right side of the quadrant.
There's also that story
Their
about his
thermostat
friend,
is set lower. Maybe just
the
enough to
highly
be comfortable
educated
or
professional in New
scrape
York.
by.
Oh,
Leading
yeah,
to
that's
that
a tough one.
feeling of
Felt
struggle
trapped
or
in his
just never
high-paying
quite
job,
breaking through.
hated
That's
it,
the idea.
died
Okay, this
young.
blueprint
The
concept
source
is really
uses
starting
it
to
as a
take
kind of
shape.
cautionary tale,
So,
right?
about
if the results
maybe
we see,
prioritizing
the
that
money, the
quadrant
house, the
security
investments, if those are the
over finding
fruits,
your path and getting
what are the
financially
roots
literate.
creating
It's a really
them? Where does
stark
this
contrast.
invisible
And then you have
force
his
come
sister, the
It
Buddhist
comes
nun,
back to
Right.
this principle
Living
of
a completely different
manifestation.
path.
the idea
Earns
that
very
what's
little
invisible,
doing her work
what's under the
technically in the
ground,
S quadrant,
creates
maybe.
what's visible
But
above.
she
The
achieved
unseen
financial
creates the
security.
seen.
Right.
How?
And there's a
Through
key
investing,
wealth
the
principle
I
stated
quadrant,
here.
rental
If you want
property,
to change
gold,
the
silver.
fruit,
Exactly.
you first have to change
Her life
the
calling
roots.
didn't mean she had
If
to be
you
poor.
want to change
She
the
understood
invisible,
the I
you must
quadrant.
first
That
change
really drives
the
the point home.
invisible.
It's
Your
like
job
electricity,
title
maybe.
doesn't have to define
can't
your
see the
financial
electricity
reality.
itself.
Mm.
But
But
you
making
definitely
that
see
shift,
its power. You see the
the
lights
source
turn
says
on.
it's
You
hard.
feel
It's
the
hard
heat.
work.
You
but
wouldn't
not
say it
just
doesn't
like
exist
mentally
just because
hard.
you
How
can't see
so?
the
It's
electrons.
the
Great
emotional
analogy,
and
exactly.
even
And trying to
spiritual
only
side
change
that's
the
often
outer
tougher.
result.
The source
The
uses
fruits
the
without
analogy
dealing
of
with the
diet and
roots,
exercise.
the invisible causes.
Okay.
You
Well,
can
the
know
sources
what you
say
should eat
that's
or
just
which
setting yourself up
exercises
for
to do.
frustration
That's the
and
mental
fighting
part.
against
But
how
actually
things
doing it
naturally work.
consistently.
So
Making
how
a
does this
real
relate
change to
That takes something
money
else.
specifically.
Emotional
They talk
commitment,
about 4
discipline.
quadrants of existence.
Exactly. It requires
the physical,
tackling
the
the
mental, the
underlying
emotional,
emotional
and
stuff,
spiritual.
the habits, the
Okay.
beliefs.
And the physical
Changing
world, where we see our
quadrants,
bank balance
especially
or lack
moving
thereof,
right,
is
is a
basically
journey
just a
of
printout.
developing yourself
It's a result,
emotionally
a reflection
and
of what's
spiritually.
going on in the
And
other
what
three
holds
realms:
people
the mental,
back
emotional,
often seems to be
spiritual.
So money.
Fear.
Fear is
Or
huge.
wealth,
Fear
or
of not
even
having
things
enough
like
money.
health or weight.
Fear of
Mm.
failing.
They're all just
So
results.
they cling to the perceived
consequences.
security
According
of
to
this
the US
yes,
job.
They
Right.
are results.
Trying to
We
avoid
live in a
that
world
fear.
of cause and
The
effect.
swords actually
Which
points
leads
to
to a
something
pretty
like the
stark
Marine Corps. They don't just
conclusion they
train you
draw.
physically and mentally.
Another
They train
wealth
you
principle.
emotionally and
A
spiritually
really
too.
powerful
To face
one.
fear,
A lack
to
of money
handle
is never the real
uncertainty.
problem.
That kind
Never
of
the root
resilience, that
problem. It's
holistic
always
development
just a
is what's
symptom
needed for
of
the
what's
B&I
happening
side,
underneath.
where things
Wow.
aren't always predictable.
Okay,
Which ties
that's a big
into
statement.
how people on
Yeah.
the right side
So,
view failure.
if it's a
doesn't it?
symptom,
It's a
we need to
completely
find the
different
cause.
perspective.
It has to
Which
be.
brings us
Think
back
about that
to the
Thomas
blueprint.
Edison quote. The
Where
source
does this
uses.
I
programming
didn't
actually
fail
come from?
1,014
How did
times.
these roots get
I've
planted?
successfully found out
The
what
sources
did not work
trace it mainly back to
1,014
childhood
times.
conditioning. It
Your subconscious
reframes
programming from when
failure
you were young.
completely.
That early
Failure
stuff.
becomes
Yeah.
learning.
That's what
Data
largely
collection.
shapes your
Exactly. In
automatic
school,
thinking
you make a
patterns,
mistake, you get marked
influences
down,
your decisions,
bad
drives your
grade,
actions, and
punishment.
ultimately
But in
produces
business
your
or investing?
financial results.
Mistakes are inevitable.
They
They're
break it down into
tuition.
3
They're
main
how
ways
you
this
learn, how
conditioning
you
gets
get better.
installed.
Okay, what's
You
the first
need
one?
the
The first
emotional
is
strength
verbal
to see
programming.
setbacks.
This is
that
basically
way,
everything
not
you
as,
heard about
you know,
money growing
proof
up.
that you're not cut out
The
for it.
saying. Okay, so mindset
Like
and
money doesn't
emotions
grow on
are key.
trees.
Exactly.
What's the next
Or
piece?
money is the root of all evil, save for a rainy
Absolutely
day.
critical.
Rich people
You
are
have to
greedy, we
learn the
can't afford
language
that.
of money,
especially for the
all
right
those
side.
phrases.
You hear them enough.
And the
And they
absolute
sink in
foundation of that language
deeply.
is
They become
assets
these
and liabilities.
automatic
You got
responses,
it.
these
You
little
must know the
tapes playing in
difference.
your
And
head
the source
whenever
keeps
money
it
comes
super
up.
simple.
So how do
An
you deal
asset.
with that?
Puts money in
If
your
it's
pocket.
And a
subconscious,
liability.
takes
The
money
sources
out of your
lay out a
pocket.
4-step
End of story.
process.
That's the
First
core
is
definition.
awareness.
And this is where the source
You actually have
gets
to listen for
a
these
bit
statements in
controversial
your
for
own
some people,
thoughts
right?
and maybe write them
saying
down.
your house
What did you hear growing
is
up?
often
Okay,
a liability.
become aware
Yeah,
of the
that
tapes.
throws people.
Second,
Think about it purely from a cash flow
understanding.
perspective. Even if you've
How
paid
might
off the
these
mortgage,
specific
money is
statements have
constantly
actually
going out.
affected your
Taxes,
financial life
insurance,
so far?
repairs,
Connect the dots.
utilities.
Right, taking money out of your pocket every
Third,
month.
disassociation.
So by that
this is
definition,
crucial. It's a liability.
Realizing
now,
these are just
it might
things you've
appreciate
learned,
in
they aren't
value. That's
necessarily
different. That's
true,
potential
and they aren't
capital
inherently
gains.
you. You can choose
But from
differently
cash
now.
flow,
so detach from them.
it
Realize
costs
they're not
you
gospel
money.
truth.
Exactly. The source also
And then
points
the
out, hey,
fourth step
your mortgage,
is that's an
declaration.
asset on the bank's
This is about
books.
actively
Ouch.
reprogramming.
Right. How do you do
And the
that?
source even
They
breaks down the
suggest
words like
specific
mortgage.
actions,
Like literally
meaning
putting
death
your hand on your
pledge
heart and
or
saying something
agreement
like,
until
what I
death.
heard
And
about money
finance
isn't necessarily
relating to a
true.
penalty
I
or
choose
fine.
to adopt
Yeah.
new ways
It
of
really
thinking
paints
that
debt
support my
differently.
happiness
It does. It
and
makes you
success.
ask,
Saying
who
it
is
out
indebted
loud.
to whom?
Yeah, and then
If
even
you
a
owe
physical
money to
action, like
lots of
touching your
people or
head and declaring, I have a
You're poor.
millionaire mind.
But if lots of people
it
or
sounds
assets
maybe a
owe
bit out
money
there.
to you.
You're
But the
wealthier.
idea is to
The
use
rich use
strong
debt,
emotional
the source
and
says,
physical
but
anchors
differently.
to install
Totally
the new
differently.
belief.
They might take
Okay,
on
so that's
huge
verbal
debt, but
programming.
only if an asset
What's
like
the
a
second
rental
influence?
property is paying
The
that
second is
debt off
modeling.
for them. They keep their
This
personal
isn't about
debt
what
that
you
kind of just takes
heard, but
money
what
out of
you
their pocket,
saw.
really small.
What your parents or
tax
guardians
system.
did with money. According to the
Exactly.
source, it kind of
How did they
pushes
behave?
E&S
Were they
folks
savers,
towards more debt.
spenders? Did they
It often
invest?
seems
Were
that
they
way.
afraid of
Encouraging
risk?
bigger houses,
Was money
tax
talked
deductions,
about
things like
easily,
that.
or was it always a
Liabilities.
source of
But
arguments
very
and
few
stress?
tax breaks.
It's that unconscious imitation again.
While the
isn't it?
B&I
Like you just pick
quadrant
things
get
up
tax
without
advantages.
realizing.
Totally. The
Significant
sources
ones.
have that funny story
The
about
tax
the ham.
code, as
Oh,
the
yeah,
source
cutting the
explains
ends
it,
off.
was really
Right.
set up
For
to favor
generations,
business
the family
and
cut the
investment.
ends off the ham
Bees and
before
eyes can
baking
generate
it.
income
Turns
inside a
out,
corporation, for
great-grandma
example.
only did it because
Pay
her pan
expenses
was too
first,
small.
then
But
get
everyone
taxed
else
on
just
what's left.
copied the
Whereas
action
an
without asking
employee
why.
Gets
It
taxed right off
perfectly
the top
illustrates
before you
how
even
we
see the
absorb
money.
behaviors.
The source calls it like
The author
being a
shares their own
50-50 partner with the
experience
government
mirroring
from
their
day
father's
one,
financial
Wow. Okay,
pattern,
so
making money
understanding
in
that
real estate, then
language,
losing it
assets,
quickly.
liabilities,
Boom, and
debt,
bust.
They
taxes.
just repeated the cycle.
That's the
unconsciously.
bedrock.
Until
It's
they
the
become aware
foundation
of
you
it.
need
Now
before you
there's
can really
also a
start
flip side
building
to
effectively
modeling
on the
mentioned.
right
Rebelling,
side.
which doing the brings us to the complete right side. opposite.
Exactly.
Building in the
Maybe your
B&I
parents were
quadrants.
really
Let's talk
frugal,
B
so you become a
first.
big spender.
Owning a
Or they
system,
struggle,
not
so
just
you're
a job.
driven to be
Right.
rich,
Remember that
almost out of
story, Ed and
anger
Bill
or
in the water?
resentment.
Like a
I'll
bucket
show
carrier
them.
versus
or
the pipeline
I'll
builder.
never be like that.
Exactly.
But
Ed
that
Hall's
can be
buckets,
tricky
that's like an
too.
S.
If
He
your
works, he gets
main
paid,
drive
he
for
stops.
wealth is
The money
rooted in
stops.
anger or
Build
fear,
builds a pipeline.
your
That's the B.
subconscious
The
links
system.
money
He
to
builds
those
a
negative
system that
feelings.
delivers water,
Oh, I see.
generates
So
income,
as you
even
get
when he's
more
not
money,
The
physically
underlying
hauling anything.
anger or fear
McDonald's
might actually
example fits here
increase.
too, doesn't it?
And
Perfectly.
eventually,
The
your
S might
subconscious,
focus on
which
making a
just
better
wants
hamburger.
peace, might
Can I
kind
make the
of
best burger in
sabotage
town?
you.
Make
But the
bad
B-
decisions.
The B
spend
asks,
recklessly.
can I build a better
anything
business
to get
system
rid
for
of the money
delivering
that's tied to the bad
It's about the
feeling?
system,
That's
not
a really
just the product
interesting
itself.
and
B
kind of scary
owners
thought.
lead
So the
people
goal
and
is
own
to
systems.
unlink money from
And
anger
how do you
and
become a
fear.
B?
And link it
according
instead
to the
to
source.
positive
Well, you could create your own
motivations, like
system from
purpose,
scratch.
contribution,
Tough, but
joy,
possible.
freedom.
Or
You
things
could
like
buy
that.
a
Makes
proven
sense.
system,
Okay,
like
so
a franchise.
verbal programming
Less risky,
modeling.
often easier to get
What's the
funding.
third way
Or you
we
can
get
join
conditioned?
something like a
The
network
third is
marketing
specific
organization.
incident.
Which the source describes
These
as
are
buying into an
particular,
existing
often
system.
emotionally
becoming part of a
charged
pre-built system. The
experiences
point
you
is,
had
a
around
proven
money
system
when you were
reduces
young.
risk.
Like a
Okay,
specific
that's
memory.
B.
Yeah.
Now,
The example given
I,
is the author's
investing.
wife. As a kid,
Money working
she'd
for
hear
you
the ice cream truck,
seems crucial
run
for
to her
real
mom for
freedom.
money,
It's
get
often
the
seen
ice
as the
cream, and
ultimate
feel
goal for
immediate joy.
long-term financial freedom.
Money
Accumulating
got
assets that
hardwired
just
to
spin off
pleasure.
cash. Passive
Instant
income.
gratification. And the source talks about a
Right.
big shift
But
here
the author's
from
own
the industrial
conditioning
age
linked money
to the
more
information
freedom.
age.
Right.
The ability
Back
to do
then,
things
maybe you
later.
had a defined benefit
So that
pension.
caused
Company
conflict
took
in the
care of you
marriage.
after years
Different
of
spending
loyalty.
habits. Now it's
Exactly.
mostly
She
defined
wanted the pleasure
contribution,
now. He
like
wanted the freedom
401k.
later.
Which
There are
means
different emotional
you
meanings
are
attached to
responsible.
money created
You need to
friction.
learn how to
So what do you
invest
do about
yourself.
that?
The
Especially in a
source even
relationship.
raises
The
questions about
suggestion
whether
is
things
for
like
partners
Social
to actually
Security
talk
or
about this
Medicare
stuff.
will be
Do an
sustainable
exercise
long
together.
term.
Uncover
The
your individual
responsibility
money
is shifting
shifting
to
to
the
the
individual.
Figure out what money means emotionally to each of you.
Successful
Is it
investors
security,
aren't just
status,
like
pleasure, freedom,
gambling on
love?
stocks. and
No,
then
not the ones
try
the
to
source
create a
describes.
shared
They're
blueprint.
focused
Yeah.
on
New
building
rules that work
income
for both.
streams.
Yeah.
Cash flow
Consciously
from their
design how you'll
investments.
Like the
handle money
Monopoly
together,
game analogy.
respecting those different meanings, but
4
finding common
greenhouses, then
ground.
1 red
And how do
hotel.
you change the
Each
impact
greenhouse
of
adds
those
cash
past
flow. The
incidents on
hotel adds
yourself?
even more.
It follows
It's
a
about
similar
acquiring
pattern
assets
to
that
the
pay
verbal
you.
Plus
programming.
the tax
Awareness.
advantages we talked
Recall
about.
the specific
Earning in the
incident and
asset
the feelings
column.
around
Huge
it.
advantage.
Understanding.
And interestingly, the
See
source
how that
suggests
single
getting
event might
good at
still
B
be
first
influencing your
can
choices
help you
today.
be a better I.
Disassociation.
Yeah, there's a logic there.
Hmm.
A successful
Recognize
B
it
quadrant
was a
business
past
can
learning
generate the
experience,
cash flow you
not who
need
you are
to
now.
invest
And then the
seriously.
declaration
What's the
step
business
again.
goals?
Right.
Hand on
Understanding
heart,
markets,
I
management,
release my
finances,
non-supportive money
systems.
experiences from the past
All
and
that
create
knowledge
a
from
new
running a
and
business
rich
is
future.
incredibly
Touch
valuable
it.
when you're
I have a
evaluating
millionaire
potential
mind.
investments in
Reinforcing
other
the
businesses or
change.
Okay,
assets.
so
building
by
on the
looking
right
at what we
side.
heard, what we
It
saw,
sounds
and
like
what
it
we
involves
experienced,
risk,
we
but
can
the
start
source
to
says it's not
decode
about
our own
avoiding risk.
blueprint.
No, not at all.
Understand
The
why our
source is
financial
really clear.
thermostat is set where it is.
Business
And the
and
really
investing
empowering
aren't
part is the
inherently
message that it's
risky.
not
Being
fixed.
uneducated
You
is
can
what's
consciously
risky.
choose to
Okay.
reprogram
So it's about learning
Which
to
leads
manage
us to
risk,
the next big
not run
idea.
away
Yeah.
from it. Actively
Precisely.
changing your
That's
thinking.
a massive mindset
Installing new
shift
wealth
from
files,
the E
as the source is
quadrant,
called.
where the goal
Exactly.
is often
The
to
core
eliminate
premise is
financial
that
risk
rich people simply
entirely
think
through job
differently about
security.
money,
Right. The
wealth,
source even
and
mentions Warren
success
Buffett
than
on
poor or middle
diversification.
class.
Yeah,
people
saying
do.
diversification
And
is
these
basically
different
a
ways of
strategy
thinking
for
these
not
wealth
losing,
files
which
are
is
learnable.
fine for many.
You can choose to
But
adopt them.
concentration,
Okay, let's
focusing
dive
your
into some of
investments
these
where you
key
have deep
files or
knowledge
distinctions.
Requires more work,
What's a
more
major
understanding.
one?
but can
A big
actually
one is
decrease your real risk
rich
if you
people
know what
play
you're
the
doing.
money game to win.
And
Poor
true
people
investors,
play
the source
not
says,
to lose.
they don't
Play
fear
to
market
win versus
volatility.
play not
They
to
welcome
lose.
it.
What's the
They
difference?
see it as
Playing
opportunity.
to win means
a
your
chance
goal
to buy
is big
good
wealth,
assets when they're on sale
abundance,
because
being truly
others
rich.
are panicking.
It's
The
offensive
source
strategy.
also mentions
Playing not to
different
lose
kinds
means
of
your primary
investors.
goal is just survival,
Like
or
that
maybe
type
comfort
C,
and security.
the
It's
I'm too
defensive.
busy
Just
investor.
trying to
Right.
avoid
The
running out
person
of
who
money.
just hands
rather
their
than
money
aiming
over to an
for
expert
massive
and
growth.
hopes for the
Right.
best.
So
What's the issue
to
there?
play
You
to
need
win, the
advisors,
sources
right?
say
You
you
absolutely need good
clear,
advisors.
specific,
But the source's
and
point
frankly
is, if you
ambitious
are
goals
financially
for your
illiterate,
income and
your
net worth.
advisors are
Aim high.
hampered.
And they
How
had
so?
that slightly
Legally and
uncomfortable action item
practically,
for this one.
they
Yeah,
can
ordering something
often
market
only
price at a
recommend
nice
very
restaurant without checking the
conservative,
price
low
first,
risk,
just to
low
stretch
yield
that comfort
strategies.
zone around
Diversified
security.
mutual funds,
Definitely
maybe.
pushes a button
Because
for
if they
many
recommend
people.
something
Wait,
more
what's another key fund?
sophisticated and
This
you don't
one's about
understand it
intensity.
and it goes wrong, rich
They could
people
be
are
liable.
committed
Exactly.
to being rich. So your
Poor
lack of
people want
education
to be
limits their
rich.
ability to
Wanting
help you
versus
with potentially
commitment.
better
Sounds subtle,
strategies.
but I guess
So
it's
the
huge.
advisor can
It's
only be
presented
as
as a massive
sophisticated as you allow
difference.
them to be,
Billions want to
based
be
on
rich,
your own
right?
understanding.
That's
But
the
wanting
gist.
is
You need to get
passive.
educated first.
Commitment
Then
means
you can
you're
find
willing to do
advisors
whatever
who
it
match your
takes
level of
legally,
understanding and
morally,
goals, and you can actually
ethically, of course,
understand their
to
advice
achieve
and
your
make
goal.
informed
It's an
decisions.
active,
It reminds me of that
unwavering
Buffett quote the
dedication.
source
No
used
reservations.
about
All
asking
in.
your insurance
That's the idea.
salesman
If you're
you
not
need
fully
insurance.
committed, obstacles will stop
Yeah,
you.
exactly.
Okay, commitment.
You
What
need
else?
your own
How
financial
do they think
intelligence to
differently about
evaluate
measuring
advice,
wealth?
which means
Rich people
training
focus
your
on
net
mind.
worth.
To see
Poor and
what
middle
others
class
don't
people
see.
tend to focus only
Like
on their
Rich
working
Dad said.
income. their
It's not what your
salary.
eyes
income
see.
alone isn't
It's what
wealth.
you can't
Not according
see
to
that's
this.
important. Net worth
Deals,
is the real
the
measure.
agreements,
That's
the
everything
market
you own your
trends,
assets
the
minus
management
everything
team,
you
the
owe your
tax
liabilities.
implications.
Okay.
All that
And there are
unseen
four
stuff.
factors that drive
The
net worth.
95% that
Income,
isn't
both working and
obvious on the
passive,
surface.
savings,
Financial
investments,
intelligence is about
and
learning to see
simplification.
that.
Which brings us right back around to the internal
spending
game.
less.
This isn't just
Exactly.
spreadsheets and strategies.
Actively
Not at
decreasing your
all.
cost
It's
of living so
deeply
you have more to
emotional.
save and
Money
invest.
brings up powerful
Most people just focus on
Fear and
income, but
greed,
then they
mainly.
hit those are the big
Parkinson's
ones.
law.
Yeah.
Parkinson's
And the force
law.
argues that your financial
Expenses
IQ
rise
is
to meet
massively
income.
influenced
Got
by
it.
your emotional
You get a raise,
IQ,
you spend
your
more.
EQ.
It doesn't
He quotes
automatically
Erasmus
build wealth unless you
saying
manage
the emotional
it.
brain is way
Rich people
stronger
focus
than
on
the
acquiring
rational.
assets,
Something
things
like
that go up in
24 times
value
more
or produce
powerful,
income,
which
like real
explains
estate
why
or
we sometimes
stocks.
make completely
Poor people
illogical
tend to buy
financial choices
expenses
based on
or things that
feelings.
depreciate,
Like buying a car
like
based on the
cars or
easy monthly
gadgets,
payment, not
often
the
funded
total
by debt.
cost or whether
So the
you
action here is
need
actually
it.
track
Exactly.
your net worth.
Emotion
Know the
overrides
number.
logic.
Yes, track
And
it
those emotions
regularly.
fuel limiting
And
thoughts too,
consciously
right? The
work
things
on
we tell
all
ourselves.
four
Oh,
factors.
absolutely.
Increasing
I'm
income,
just not good with money.
saving more,
Investing
investing
is too risky
wisely,
for me.
and
You need
simplifying
money
your
to make
lifestyle.
money. Maybe look
I'm
into
not
real
smart
estate
enough for
investing,
business.
as the author's
The
parents
source
did
has that
successfully.
line.
Okay, that makes sense.
All
And managing the
words
money
are
you do
mirrors.
have seems critical
For they
too.
reflect
Absolutely.
back
That's
some
another wealth
insight
file.
as to what
Rich people
manage
think about
their money well.
themselves.
Poor
It's
people
a
mismanage
powerful
it or
idea.
avoid it altogether.
Your personal
Why
truths
is managing
about
so
money.
important,
Might
even if you don't
actually
have
be
much yet?
personal
The
lies
principle
driven by
stated is
fear,
powerful.
holding you back.
Right. And the
Until
source
you show the
challenges you to
universe
look at excuses.
or yourself
like if you
or
say,
whatever you
I can't
believe
start a
in,
business
that you
because
can
my
handle what
spouse
you've
won't
already
support
got.
it.
The
you
divorce
won't
suggests
get
maybe
more.
that's a reflection
Like
of
the
your
kid
own
in the
fear.
ice cream
Or
cone.
maybe your
If they
inability
drop the
to
single
communicate
scoop.
You're not
effectively
going to trust
about
them with
Exactly.
a triple scoop.
It's not necessarily about
The
blaming
habit
the
of managing
spouse.
money
It's about
is
looking
deemed more
inward.
important
What's
than the
the
amount you're
real
managing
block?
initially.
You have to
So
listen
what
to the
kind
doubt,
of system
sure,
do they
but then
suggest?
a specific
deeper.
one using
Find a
multiple
root.
accounts.
And the
A
antidote
key
to that
one
fear
is the financial freedom
is
account money
passion.
that is only
what
for
Rich Dad
investing,
told the author.
for buying assets that
When
generate
fear starts
passive
creeping
income.
in, never
You gotta
spend,
fan the
only
flames of your
invest it.
passion.
Okay, for building wealth.
Your
But
fear
there's
has
another
pushed
interesting
aside your
one.
passion.
The
Keep the
play
flame in
account.
your heart alive.
Play. Passion
Like
builds
fun
businesses.
money.
Exactly.
Fear
A
paralyzes.
certain
That's the
percentage
idea.
goes
Passion
into this
gives you the
account, and the
fuel
rule
to
is you
push
must
through the
spend it
inevitable
every
obstacles
single month.
and fears.
And
on
who you
things
hang
that
out
make you
with,
feel pampered,
that affects your passion, your
luxurious,
mindset.
rich.
Massively.
That sounds counterintuitive
The
to
source
saving.
is blunt.
It does,
Who
but the
you spend your
rationale is
time with
twofold.
is your future.
One, it makes the whole process more enjoyable,
That's a
less
challenge.
about
It
deprivation.
really is. It suggests you
Two, it
literally write
strengthens your
down
receiving
the
muscle.
6 people you
It
spend
helps
the
you
most
feel
time with.
comfortable
And think
having and
about
spending money on
their
yourself,
values, their
balancing the
conversations,
saving and
how they
investing
think about
discipline.
money and risk.
So you don't feel
Yeah.
guilty
How are
about
they
enjoying
influencing
life
you?
while
Your
building
thoughts,
wealth.
your ambitions, your fears.
It keeps things in
And the
balance.
tough part.
The underlying wealth
Maybe
principle
changing
here
your
is
future
stark.
means changing some of
Either
those
you control your
associations.
money,
It might.
or it will
Even if
control
they're great
you.
friends, if they're stuck
Management
in a
is how
mindset
you
that
take
pulls you
control.
away from the path
And that
you wanna
focus
be
on
on,
investing leads to the
the
next
source
file,
suggests you
doesn't
might
it?
need to consciously
Rich people
adjust
have their
who
money work
influences
hard for
you
them.
most.
Poor
That's the
people
hard
work
truth.
hard for
It
their
is.
money.
This
But
is
the
the
source frames
fundamental
it as
shift
essential for growth,
from active
especially
income,
towards the
trading
right
your
side.
time for
Okay.
dollars.
Wow. To passive
So we've
income.
covered a lot.
Money
The
coming
map,
in, whether
the
you're actively
mindsets,
working or
the
not.
language,
Exactly.
the B&I
That's
skills,
the goal for
risk,
true financial
crucial
freedom.
internal
When your
game.
passive income is
Where does
greater
someone
than your
actually
expenses,
start? How
you're
do you
no
take the
longer
first
dependent
step?
on your
The key
job.
message is
And where does passive income
Start
come
small.
from?
Two main
Take
sources discussed.
baby steps.
Money
Not a
working
giant
for you
leap.
investments
No.
like stocks,
Don't try to change
bonds,
everything
real estate
overnight.
rentals, things
Financial
that
success,
pay
the
dividends
source
or
argues,
interest
isn't
or
about the size of
appreciate.
your strides.
And
It's about the
business
number
working
of
for
steps
you
you
take
take
consistently
consistently
in
in
the
the right
generate
direction.
income
And
without
learning
your
comes from
constant
doing it
presence,
and messing
like
up sometimes.
royalties,
Absolutely.
licensing
Get out of
fees,
analysis
or
paralysis,
even
where you
well-structured
study and
network
study
marketing
but never
businesses.
actually do anything
But
because
getting
you're afraid to
passive
make a
income,
mistake.
which the source says happens
It
a lot
feels
with
kind of
highly
unnatural
educated
for most
people
people,
because
right?
school
We're taught to
punished
work for our
mistakes.
money.
Right.
It's deep
But think about
conditioning.
learning to
It
walk
requires
or
shifting
ride a
from
bike.
short-term
You
thinking
fell
the
down.
next paycheck
That's how you learn.
to a long-term
Financial
focus
learning
on
is
building
similar.
assets
It involves
that will eventually
doing,
work
making
for you.
mistakes,
So actions here are
adjusting.
things like
It's
learning
mental,
about investing,
emotional, and physical.
actively looking for
Okay,
passive
so
income
what are some
streams.
concrete
Maybe
baby steps
buying
the
that
source
rental
suggests?
property.
Yes,
First,
educating yourself,
get clear on
and
your
taking
goals.
steps, even
Define
small
them.
ones,
What's
towards
your
building
5-year
those
goal for
passive
passive
streams.
income
Okay, we've
from
talked a lot
assets?
about mindset.
What's your 1-year goal
beliefs,
for maybe
managing.
cutting debt
Yeah.
or increasing
But none of it
cash
happens
flow?
without
Write it down.
doing
Makes
stuff.
sense.
Action.
What else?
Absolutely
Second,
crucial.
get
Action is the
control of
bridge
your
that connects
cash
your
flow.
inner world
You have
thoughts,
to know where your
feelings,
money is going
blueprint to
now.
your outer world
Track your
results.
spending.
Thoughts lead to
Identify
feelings,
the
feelings lead
leaks,
to
the
actions, actions lead to
liabilities,
results
the
that
bad
chain,
debt.
and then attack
Exactly.
the debt.
Changing your
Yeah,
thinking
the
is
source gives a
vital,
specific
but it has to
strategy for
translate
that.
into different
Find,
actions
say,
to get
an
different
extra
results.
$150
And here's
or
a really
$200
freeing
a
wealth
month.
principle
Pick
they
one
share.
credit card.
It is
pay the
not
minimum
necessary
plus
to
that
try and
extra
get rid of
amount
fear
once
in
it's
order
paid
to
off.
succeed.
Snowball it.
Yeah.
Take
You
that
don't have to
whole
conquer
payment
fear
amount
first?
and
Nope.
add it to the minimum
Success
on the
comes
next
from
card.
practicing
Exactly.
acting in
Keep
spite
snowballing
of
it.
fear.
It builds momentum.
In spite of
Okay,
doubt,
goals,
worry, discomfort,
cash flow,
inconvenience,
debt reduction.
even when you're just
Third,
not in the mood.
Education.
Wow.
Commit
Act
time to
despite
it.
the
Schedule
fear.
it like an
That's the
appointment,
key,
maybe 5
which
hours a
connects
week.
to that
Doing
formula.
what?
Reading
CZ,
financial news,
WZ.
websites, books,
Comfort zone equals
listening to
wealth zone.
podcasts like
Right.
this one, hopefully.
If you stay in your comfort
playing
zone,
the
you're
cash
wealth
flow
zone stays
game.
small.
Maybe
You
attending
only
a
grow
seminar.
personally and
The
financially
author tells
when
that
you
story
step
about
outside
making
your
millions
comfort zone,
from what
when
he
you do
learned
things that
in
feel
just one
uncomfortable.
But our minds fight
$385
that, don't they?
real estate
They invent
course.
reasons
Because he
not
actually
to act.
applied
yeah.
it.
That's the key. He
The
took
sources
action.
call the
Okay,
mind a
fourth step.
master of disaster,
Seek
always
out
creating
mentors.
worst-case scenarios.
Find
Like
people
Mark
who
Twain
have already
supposedly
done
said,
what you want to do.
worried about a lot of
Role
things that never
models.
happened.
And maybe reverse
Taking
role
action,
models, too.
especially
People who show
uncomfortable
you what
action,
not
is what
to do.
actually rewires
learn
you.
from
It's like
both.
building a
Find
muscle.
people who've
The action
successfully
itself
walked the
changes you.
path you're interested in.
Exactly.
Ask
Them
them questions
questions
at a cellular
Learn
level,
from their
builds
experience.
resilience.
Okay,
And the
one
fifth
more
step sounds like
really key wealth file
just
we need
do
to touch
something.
on.
Pretty much.
The difference in
Take
learning.
action.
Ah,
Any action,
yes.
even small.
Rich
Make
people
lowball
constantly
offers
learn
on
and
tiny
grow.
investment
Poor people
properties
think
just
they
to
already
learn the
know.
process.
This is flagged as a
Join a
major
network
obstacle.
marketing company to
Thinking you know
practice
it all.
sales and learn about
Huge.
systems.
If you're not as
Invest
successful
a
or
very
happy
small
as
amount
you
of money
want
in
to be,
something just
the
to get
basic
skin in the game,
premise
so you're
is
forced to pay attention
there's
and
something
learn.
you don't know
The
yet.
source really
something to
echoes
learn.
that famous
Makes sense.
slogan, doesn't it?
Success,
Just do
they
it.
argue,
Get
isn't
started.
some
And the
innate
cash flow
gift.
game
It's
comes
a
up again
learnable
here
skill,
as a
like
tool
any
for this
skill.
kind of
Think about
learning.
it. Every
Yeah,
master
it's
was
specifically
once recommended as a
disaster.
way to
True.
practice.
Nobody
To train
starts
your
out an
mind,
expert.
your emotions,
The
your
focus shouldn't
reactions
just
to
be on
financial
getting rich,
situations,
but on
buying
becoming the kind
assets,
of person who
managing
can
cash
attract,
flow,
create, and
dealing
handle
with
wealth.
liabilities, but
It's
in
about
a safe,
who you need to be
simulated
so you can do
environment.
what's
Like
needed
that guy who called
to
it his
have the
financial
results
wake-up
you
call.
want.
He
Exactly.
do have.
Playing the
Not
game
have
helped
to
him
be, which is how
fundamentally
many people
shift his
approach it.
thinking
Right.
and
Your
his
outer
real-world
world
financial
reflects your inner
habits.
world, so you
It's
need
a
to grow
practice
yourself. And
So
part
the
of that
source
is
is
striving
clear.
for excellence
The
in your
road to
field.
faster
Get paid the
financial
best,
freedom,
you must be
the
the
fast
best.
track,
That's the
runs
idea.
through the B&I
Become a
quadrant.
master of
That's
what
the
you
argument.
do.
Building
And
systems,
importantly,
building
when you
cash
seek
flowing
advice
assets,
or
that's
learning,
the path.
learn from people
And
who have actually
interestingly, the
walked
source
the walk,
suggests that
who
once
have the
you're
real
established
world
on the right
results you
side,
want,
it can
not
actually
just
feel more
theorists or
secure
broke
than relying
advisors.
on a
So
single
practical
paycheck from
steps,
one employer.
because
You
you
have
get to
multiple
lifelong
streams of
learning,
income,
read
more
books,
control.
take
You're
courses,
shifting from
find
working
mentors.
for money to
Yes,
having
and
money and
crucially,
systems work for
do
you.
the action
Okay.
exercises
So
recommended
wrapping
in the
up,
material you
We've gone
study.
through
Don't
the
just read
quadrants,
about
the
it.
mindsets,
Apply
the
it.
language assets, Okay, so
and
we've covered the
liabilities being
blueprint,
key,
the conditioning,
building
the wealth
B&Is,
files,
Right.
managing risk,
changing your
the
inner
huge
world.
role of advisors
But the
in your
sources
own
also talk
education,
about
the
external
critical
influences,
internal emotional
specifically
gain,
who you hang
and
out
finally
with.
those
Yes,
practical
the power
baby
of
steps to just
association.
get
You
started.
know the
It's a
saying,
whole
birds
framework,
of a
a
feather
map,
flock
like we said.
together.
It's
And
more
it's
than just a
definitely a
cliche
challenging
here.
journey.
Apparently
the source
so.
outlines,
They
but
cite research
message is that
suggesting your
it's
income
achievable.
tends to hover
With the
within
right
about 20% of the
education,
average
the right
income
mindset
of your
shift,
closest
and
friends.
crucially
Wow,
consistent
really?
action.
That's specific. The
It
source material
suggests we're
lays out
heavily
this map,
influenced
this
by the people
potential
we spend the
path.
most time with.
But ultimately,
Rich
it's up to
people
each of
tend
us,
to
isn't it?
associate with
The
other
choice of which path
successful,
to walk,
positive people
or even
winners.
which quadrant to
Poor
aim for
people
is
often
yours.
associate with
So maybe
others
the
who might
question
be
for you
negative
listening
or
is,
reinforce
where
limiting
are you on
beliefs
this map
losers
right now? And
in the
where do you
context
truly
of the
want
money
to go?
game.
And why is that?
And maybe
Is it
one
just
final
get
thought to leave you with,
comfort?
building on the source.
Largely, yes.
As the
It feels
economy keeps
comfortable,
changing, shifting
familiar,
from that old
safe
industrial
to be
age
around
model to this
people
new
who are at a
information
similar
age,
level or
the
share
source
similar
talks about these
complaints.
huge transfers of
doesn't
wealth that
challenge you.
happen during
So if you want to
times
increase your
of
wealth,
change.
you
So the
might
question
need
is,
to get
as these
comfortable
shifts
being
continue,
uncomfortable
will
around
you
more
be
successful
equipped to
people.
manage
That's
your
part
money
of it.
with
You
your
need to
mind,
adjust your own
seeing the
internal
unseen
blueprint so
opportunities
you
and
feel
risks?
worthy.
Or